In this video, we'll conclude our review of Genesis through Kings, Implication, and Proclamation. Let's resume then with 1st and 2nd Samuel. On the individual implication level, we have a series of leaders, beginning with Samuel himself, moving through Saul and then David, leaders who are brought into a position of authority by God. They're commissioned by Him. At the same time, individuals need to realize that they are accountable to God. So you may be commissioned by God. You remain accountable to God. How should the group learn lessons from these books? Leaders must be respected and held accountable. So they deserve respect, but they are to be held accountable. We see Samuel holding Saul accountable. We see Nathan holding David accountable. Do the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel say anything to peoples or nations who are not part of God's people yet? There comes to mind that when the ark was lost to the Philistines, the capture of that ark was celebrated by them setting it up in the various temples, paraded around, particularly the temple of Dagon. And you'll recall how that the idol in that temple toppled over and was destroyed, and the people suffered a curse and some illness as a result of their arrogant misinterpretation of military victory. So here's what they went wrong. They assumed that by beating the people of God militarily, that meant that they were superior to the God of the Israelites. Nothing could have been farther from the truth. Defeat of God's people does not imply the defeat of God. He retains his throne far in the heavens above all nations. How can truths within these books of 1st and 2nd Samuel then come out in a fashion that people will be able to ingest them and draw spiritual nourishment from them? Some rich characters whom we could review tell the story of Hannah and her longing for a son and God's provision of that, and then her worship of God and fulfilling her promise to devote that son to God through a life of service. And that was the boy Samuel, who grew up to be a very powerful and respected prophet. Then, after Samuel's own story, which interweaves with Saul and David, we could turn to the story of Saul, who initially began well, but then the prerogatives of leadership went to his head. His son fares much better, although dies young. And then there is David, with, again, a good beginning and some intervals within his life which were very problematic, to say the least. Think of the Bathsheba incident and the trouble that he brought on himself, on his family, because of that disobedience. The episodes with Absalom, rebellion, sedition within his own family. Then there's the character of Nathan and his role as a prophet to encourage David at times, and other times to challenge him. If we were to look at the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel through the eyes of major events, through that lens, we might want to focus on the call of Samuel, and then how he interacted with the monarchs. We might want to look at the ups and downs of the first king, and on the problematic, the dangerous beginning of David, courageous with Goliath, but then having to run away to save his life from malevolent Saul. These we'll want to package in ways that people can apply them to their lives. What does God look like viewed through the lens of 1st and 2nd Samuel? We see him as someone who taps individuals on the shoulder, as it were, and says, I want you to lead my people. And yet he is one who does not give a carte blanche to them, but holds them accountable to lead his own people attentive to him and in a fashion that is therefore moral. If we wanted to focus on just a couple of passages, two we might consider are the failure of Saul. In chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, And then God's words to Samuel when he's in the process of identifying which of Jesse's sons should be the replacement king following Saul. David is identified, and in that process, God says, I look on the heart. Humans look on the outward person. Is he handsome, tall, short, whatever? God says, I look on the heart. And that will bring us to 1st and 2nd Kings. Implications for individuals. Once again, the primary individual focus that we have is with these various leaders, for they are the main players in these books. And we find that they are capable of making decisions, some good decisions, favoring God. Some of the things Solomon did were right, some he did were wrong. We have good kings like Josiah or Hezekiah. We have wicked kings like Manasseh or Zedekiah. So leaders are moral agents responsible for the choices they make. We as leaders need to consistently subject our choices to God's scrutiny and choose Him above all. Our best model for this is Jesus Himself. As He describes the choices that He was making, He says, I watch what Father is doing and I do that. I do the things that please Him. This should be our model. This must be our model. Anything less and we're harming ourselves and disappointing Him. How about corporate implications? We find that the people experience either God's faithfulness to punish or God's faithfulness to rescue, depending on their orientation to Him. The global implications will remind you of what we said just a bit ago concerning the Philistines when they captured the ark, the early chapters of the book of 1 Samuel. But now it will be Assyria conquering the northern Israel and eventually Babylon conquering southern Israel. It's important for them to realize that when God's people suffer punishment, it does not mean that the Assyrian God is superior to the God of Israel or the Babylonian God is superior to the God of Israel. It's simply that God has given over His people to experience hardship in order to teach them a lesson, give them the consequences of their rejection of Him. If we were to extract some main pieces from the books of 1st and 2nd Kings to present to people we are leading or ministering to, we might consider drawing from the stories of major characters like Solomon, Elijah, Ahab in his opposing position against God, Elisha, the pious King Josiah, and King Hezekiah. Major events, we might want to pay attention to the completion of the Solomonic Temple, particularly God's seal of approval by moving in, miraculous infusion of His, the splendid presence, the cloud of His presence, just as He did at the conclusion of the construction of the wilderness tabernacle. We might want to pay attention in 1 Kings 18 to Elijah's showdown with the prophets of Baal. And we don't want to miss the climactic events leading up to and culminating in the fall of Samaria, the northern kingdom of Israel, at the hands of Assyria, 721 BC. And later on, 586 BC, this fall of southern Israel to Babylon. We'll want to routinely extract from these characters and events principles then that we can apply to our lives. How does God appear through this book? Well, we see Him responding to leaders that seek Him out in a way that cares for them, that gives strength to the kingdom. We could state the opposite as well, couldn't we? That as people routinely, over a period of years and decades, even centuries, resist Him, eventually there will be consequences, because evidently nothing less than severe consequences would teach them the lessons. Perhaps you're aware, but if not, it's instructive to notice that after the destruction of southern Israel, after that exile, idolatry never raises its head again as a problem among the Jewish people. So in terms of punishment that effected a cure, the exile of the southern kingdom of Israel was effective in curing Israel of idolatry. And that's, God is moving events and pushing people into better relationship with Him. And single-hearted devotion is definitely what is best for us, and a respectful and appropriate response to God. Key passages we might draw out from 1st and 2nd Kings. Here are a couple to consider. Solomon's prayer of dedication in 1 Kings 8 is just a rich expression of a gratitude, allegiance to God. And then following on that, God's promise to prosper Solomon, and particularly the fact that it's conditional. If you follow me with a whole heart, he says in essence, then I will prosper your kingdom. As long as Solomon did that, it worked out. Unfortunately, that did not persist, and the kingdom is divided. Jeroboam sets up the northern kingdom in opposition, which later falls, and then sometime later the southern kingdom falls. This concludes our survey looking back over the books of Genesis to Kings. I hope that this rapid review will have done a couple of things. It will have reminded you of things you've learned, and then given a bit of a model how to extract key principles from this broad section of God's Word, and think about ways that we can compress it in order to present it in a nourishing way to the people God's put under our care.